Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let's make a start. So welcome, I'm Gary Futcher. I'm Programme Lead for Educating Differently at Real Ideas. And I'd like to welcome you to this very special webinar focused on the work of the Penryn Creativity Collaborative. When we're presenting this as part of our Arts Council England Bridge organisation support. The Creativity Collaborative's initiative is an Arts Council funded 3-year project that's piloting a national cohort of 8 collaboratives to test a range of innovative practices in teaching for creativity. And the Southwest is represented by Penryn College in Cornwall. And I'm delighted this afternoon to be joined by Sarah Childs, the lead for Penryn College, and Ursula Crickmay and Kerry Chappell from the University of Exeter, which is the research partner for the Penryn Collaborative. And collectively, they are going to share some of the findings and reflections of the year 1 of their project. But before we go any further, and before we get stuck into things, I'm just going to ask each of them to introduce themselves to you briefly, so you know who they are and you can put a name to a face. So Sarah, over to you first, please.
Afternoon, everybody. Lovely to see so many very familiar names. My name's Sarah Childs. I am lead for the Penryn Creativity Collaboratives. I'm a lead practitioner here at Penryn College and a member of the senior leadership team. I'm also a teacher. My week entails everything from EYFS up to Key Stage 4, and I've formerly been head of music and head of creative arts, whilst also working regionally and a bit nationally on developing music curriculum. So I'm really thrilled to be here this afternoon. I'm going to pass to Ursula.
Hello, thank you, Sarah. So I'm really pleased to be here as well. I'm Ursula Crickmay. I'm a researcher on this project, and I'm based in the School of Education at the University of Exeter. And at Exeter, I'm also studying for a PhD at the moment. So that's the other sort of side of what I'm doing at the minute. And my background is in developing creative learning programmes with arts organisations. I'm going to hand over to Kerry.
Thanks, Ursula. I'm Kerry Chappell. I'm also situated in the School of Education at the University of Exeter, where I run the Creativity in Education Research Network. I've been researching creativity in education for about 20 years now. My original background is in dance as a dance artist and educator, and I've gradually shifted over to work both in dance still and also in creativity and education work, and that takes me across the school setting into higher education, all sorts of different settings, and working across different disciplines as well, the arts, sciences, interdisciplinary work, etc. So and I'm an associate professor at Exeter, so that's me.
Thank you all very much. What a joy that you all wear so many different hats. How fantastic. Thank you very much. So to business. The webinar is broken down into roughly 3 parts. So there's a presentation on your year 1 of the project. There's a breakout session that will break you out into smaller groups to reflect on some of the findings and how they resonate with you. And then finally, a plenary session with a question and answer. So the key bit about the question and answer, if you've got thoughts, comments, or questions as we go, then please drop them into the chat and we'll try to come to as many of those as we can before the end of our hour. Holly, our producer, will also be dropping in relevant links to the chat as we go, so keep an eye on the chat as the process happens. And finally, as Holly's put in the chat, if you can keep your cameras and mics off until you are in the breakout rooms, that will really help us just manage things. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sarah in the initial stages for the start of the presentation. Over to you.
Thanks, Gary. And as Gary said a minute ago, if there are any points, anything you want to add in the chat, please do so. Gary will keep a good check on that, and we look forward to having a look at some of those comments from our initial question. So Kerry, Ursula, if you're happy with the next slide, that'd be fantastic. Thank you. So it's just an introduction to start off around the aims of our session this afternoon. We want to share some of the highlights from our Year 1 report. We're technically in Year 2 of our Creativity Collaboratives journey, but obviously we spent quite a lot of time last year, and we really want to share those findings with you. We'll have an opportunity for a Q&A. But again, if you're not quite sure where to find our Year 1 report, Ursula, next slide, please. Holly will be putting in the links in a moment. Our Year 1 report can be found on the Penryn College website, along with some fantastic resources around our creative skills and our Better Prepared for a Creative Future framework as well for you. If at any point you do want to put some more comments in or make some notes and catch up with us later on, we will give you some more contact details towards the end. So a quick introduction around the Arts Council's Creativity Collaboratives. As Gary said, we are a 3-year pilot programme for the Arts Council. We are one of 8 clusters. They are spread across England. And the aim is to look at practice around teaching for creativity. Innovative practice, obviously, and this idea of how then we can share with the potential for some quite substantial change, we hope. Many of you will remember the Durham Commission, and I know Holly will put those links in as well for me. And one of the key recommendations from the Durham Commission was these pilot clusters and the creativity collaboratives. Obviously, that was back in 2019, had a slight hiccup that meant there was a delay because of COVID, and now we're thrilled to have started where we are with the creativity collaboratives. We started back in 2021. October 2021. Obviously, hugely funded by the Arts Council alongside generous support from the Freedlands Foundation, and this project will come to its end towards the end of 2024. So just an introduction really about therefore what happened for us. Each collaborative, next slide please Ursula, each collaborative has its own line of inquiry, and I know Holly will put the links in for more details about the other collaboratives, but our question was quite a punchy but simple one. Does teaching creativity across the curriculum lead to young people who are better prepared for their future in a changing workforce? Put really simply, we are wanting our young people to have inspiring teaching and learning for a really future-proofed curriculum. I always give the example of our current students in our partnership in reception. Who knows what their world of work will look like by the middle of 2030, and we want to consider where creative skills and teaching for creativity really sit in that journey for our young people. We want our young people across the curriculum to have their creativity really harnessed and fostered throughout their journey from reception all the way until they leave us. We know along the way we will have some big milestones we need to take. For example, we are currently working with teachers and leaders about how we implement change for the teaching of creativity. We also, as you'll see in a moment, are in the process, we've developed our creative skills, and we're looking at those currently in classrooms across a variety of subjects. We want to look for a model for developing pedagogy across the partnership. And I'll give you a little bit more context about the partnership in a minute. And as you'll see later on, we've started to develop a framework about what that might look like over time and how those skills might develop for our young people. So next slide, please, Esther. Our partnership is based down right at the bottom on the southwest coast of Cornwall. At Penryn College is a 11 to 16 school. And we have been part of what's called our Penryn Partnership for nearly over 20 years. Our Penryn Partnership is originally, I guess, our local feeder schools, and we are a secondary school with 8 primary schools. Originally, the Penryn Partnership was really built on the vision about young people having a really breadth of provision across their curriculum, and which would enable them to be creative and resilient and independent learners. Within our partnership, we have some very small schools, we have some very larger primary schools, and we have 2 ARB units for SEND provision. We knew, however, that we couldn't do this journey without quite a lot of friends to help us along the way. So we've developed our learning community. Next slide, please, Ursula. Our learning community is a coming together of not just expertise, but also people who I know will harness and foster the important aspects of our line of inquiry. So thrilled to be joined by Kerry and Ursula along the journey. We know, and the Arts Council was really keen, that each collaborative had a research partner through a university. We knew of the work that was obviously already going on through Exeter, and we wanted to make sure that our research was of the top quality and measured the impact of it. We therefore worked really closely with Kerry and Ursula, and they'll talk about that journey and what we did last year in a moment. Because of our line of inquiry, we also wanted to have some local industry and cultural partners. Real Ideas is a fantastic example, working with Gary and Sarah Waller, but we've also working with some local industry partners, because for us to know how we better prepare people for their future workforce, we wanted to know what that should look like, not just now, but in the future. We wanted to work with partners also who really understood our schools and wanted to work in our schools with our teachers and with our students to really help us understand how we better prepare them for this future ahead of them. We've also got obviously the expertise of the Arts Council, and nice to see colleagues from here today joining us, and Durham University, who not only are fostering the peer network between the collaboratives, but also this idea of how we share practice and disseminate all our findings over our 3-year journey. What we would like to do for the next part of the presentation is talk through how we did that last year. Last year very much focused on researching, us learning more, so that by the time we got to year 2, we were able to share and discuss that practice in our classrooms. So I'm going to pass over to Ursula. Ursula's going to talk about essentially how we did it. Ursula.
Okay, thanks very much, Sarah. So this is what we got up to in year 1. So we have this big overarching question, which Sarah's already introduced, which is, does teaching creativity across the curriculum lead to young people who are better prepared for their future in a changing workforce? Now, that's quite a big question. So what we've done, Sarah's smiling, is to break that down. And each year we've got 3 sub questions, where we can look in a little bit more detail in a more focused way. So in year 1, our sub questions are the ones here. Why are creative skills needed in a changing workforce? What creative skills are needed to be developed by Cornish students, so making it really specific to Cornwall, to become better prepared? And how do we best prepare schools and teachers for teaching for creativity? So those were our kind of focus areas for year 1 that we looked at in a bit more detail. And the way that we did that began with a literature review, and that focused in particular on the first 2 questions. So we looked at the academic literature. We also looked at national and international industry reports, as well as reports on local industry. And that kind of gave us an overall picture based on the literature on what we might expect in terms of those first 2 questions. But we then looked in more detail through a series of focus groups. So we spoke to groups of students from Key Stage 2, 3 and Key Stage 4. We spoke to our industry and cultural partners, as well as talking to school staff. So we got the input from all of these different groups around those different research questions. We did a thematic analysis of the data to develop our responses to research questions 1 and 2. And Kerry's going to say a bit more about what we found in relation to those questions in a minute. But just to say how we collected information around the third of our questions, how do we best prepare schools and teachers for teaching for creativity? So we looked in a number of different places for information to help us answer that question. Sarah conducted a whole series of meetings with head teachers, which gave us information about how pedagogy is developed across school and across the partnerships. And then we supplemented that with some further information from the literature. So we looked again at creative pedagogies, and we synthesized 2 existing frameworks, looking at how do we teach for creativity. We used 2 existing frameworks and synthesize those for our project. And then we also were able to use some secondary data. So Durham University administered a survey across all 8 of the creativity collaboratives, and they were able to supply us with the data which was just specific to Penryn. So that gave us some information about all of our participants' current experiences of learning and teaching creatively. And we then created our own version of that survey for our local industry and cultural partners, and also created a focus group version, a kind of spoken version, which we were able to involve some of the students from the area resource bases in. So those students were able to participate as well. So it was all of that information together which helped us to come up with a response to research question 3. So I'm going to hand over to Kerry to say a bit about what we found.
Thank you, Ursula. Great. So I'm going to give you some insight into the work that came before the skills and the pedagogies to sort of explain why we got to the place we got to with those skills and pedagogies. So as Ursula said, we were able to access some of the Durham University data as well, and that was really helpful to give us an insight into the level of understanding of creativity that teachers had across the partnership. It was varied, and there was variance in confidence and in experience across the partnership. It was really helpful to have that information, because what it allowed us to do was to be confident to move forward, that actually what we really needed was a framework of a definition of creativity and a breakdown of what those creative skills might look like, as Ursula said, specific to this collection of schools in Cornwall, but to really give us a definition that staff could be anchored into as part of their work going forward. So that's one of the first main things that was very important about the findings. Another one that I would like to talk to you about from this slide is the perception of where creativity sits. I don't think this will come as a surprise to many of you to hear that there was a perception across all of the data sets that we were drawing on from the school and the schools and the college, that creativity was perceived by many to be taught through the creative and performing arts subjects. Now, when we went into this project, we were all very clear and very passionate about the fact that creativity exists in every subject. It is not that the arts brings that into a school. The arts absolutely does that, but it is evident and manifest in different ways in different subjects. So again, this was a real kind of heads up for us to say, okay, we need to turn and make sure that whatever comes next in years 2 and 3 of the project, we're really focusing on creativity across the curriculum, which has led us, as Sarah was saying, to be carrying out action research in as many subjects as we can across the partnership schools in year 2 at the moment. Another element of the findings that I wanted to highlight to you was the challenges of teaching for creativity. I think we're all aware that we are not in the most conducive climate at the moment educationally in this country to be teaching for creativity. The surveys, the focus groups, etc., really brought that to light. So again, one of the things that it encouraged us to do was to think about a pedagogical framework, a teaching and learning framework that would again allow us to give the teachers and the students in the classrooms the confidence to understand what teaching for creativity looked like in relation to the creative skills. And the final point of this slide I'd just like to draw attention to is the role and relationship of the cultural and industry partners in the research. They were certainly a strong part of the data collection exercise, and they were very clear how important creative skills would be for them, having young people coming through from the network of schools and the college in Penryn, that they would need those creative skills. And that again reinforced and gave us the confidence to move forward into year 2 and 3, making connections between the action research that the teachers are doing this year with an industry partner to really make that workforce connection. So could I have the next slide, please, Ursula? Thank you so much. So all of that sort of baseline understanding allowed us then to move on, as Ursula said. We were looking at lit reviews, a whole range of different approaches to pull together this creative skills framework for the Penryn Creativity Collaborative specifically. So those of you researching in and working in creativity and education will recognise these kind of skills as well, though I think they're not particularly unique so much to the Cornish setting, but they are, I think, derived from our work in this arena. So just to take you through those quickly, I think one of the real fundamentals when we're working with creativity at Exeter, and that we have brought through in the project, I think, is this this notion of creativity as dialogic, a dialogue and collaboration skill within creativity. So really understanding creativity is not rooted in an individual, but working in between individuals, in the space in between. So really pulling through the importance of collaboration and communality as part of how creativity works, and being in relationship with other people, with other disciplines, with ideas is really important as a creative skill. The next one, generating new ideas that matter. Again, the work that we do at Exeter and the work that had come through on the literature review really pulls this idea through, and many of you will be aware of this work from Anna Craft's work, the idea that ethics is really fundamentally important to creativity, and that actually the outcomes that we encourage students to produce, they need to be thinking about the ethical impacts of their ideas, so that not only are they generating new ideas, but they understand the value of them and why they matter and what benefit they're bringing to those around them. Honing and developing ideas, really pushing reflective, persistent skills, understanding the rules of a discipline, the consequences, and those elements getting stronger the higher up the curriculum we go. The fourth one being imaginative and playful. I don't think you could have a definition of creativity without this idea of going beyond the obvious, playing with ideas. And again, for us, I think really making sure actually that the word playful was in there as this defining point of this creative skill, because play is important, not just in the early years, but right through the school curriculum, and really trying to set the tone that we could have play happening right through to Key Stage 4 as part of what was going on creatively. The final skill is empowered action. So really the agency, the ability for students to come up with their own ideas, to take action in relation to them, and to take risks. I think education at the moment can be very risk averse, and how we encourage students safely, but how we encourage them to take risks as part of the creative skill set is really important. Next slide, please, Ursula. This, as Sarah mentioned, is the bigger framework that we're working to. I am not going to go through this blow by blow in detail. It is very aspirational at the moment. You can probably see from the slide that what's going on is we've taken each of the 5 skills and set them out in a progression framework from the foundation stage right through to Key Stage 4. It really is an aspiration that hopefully by the end of next year, schools across the partnership will be starting to use this framework, starting to think about what progression looks like, and to start to play with this, alter it, tweak it. It's very much us as a team at the moment having just written this. So again, it's in the Year 1 report. It's there if you want to access it, to have a look at it, to have a play with it yourselves. But it's an aspiration for Year 3 that we're moving towards this notion of understanding the progression of creative skills in the partnership as well. Next slide, please, Ursula. Great. So the last thing I just wanted to talk to you about is the pedagogies. And all I mean when I use that word is just the teaching and learning strategies, the environment, the way the teacher is getting students to work. So that notion of what is going on that the teacher is establishing in the space in order to encourage those creative skills. And it felt really important for us to have the creative skills matched with an understanding of creative pedagogies in our collaborative. So as Ursula said, we brought together 2 frameworks. One comes from a really strong systematic literature review that was done recently. So we're kind of secure that we think these creative pedagogies are very sort of current understandings of practice. At the bottom, you'll see professional wisdom. And I never know when I present this list whether to put that at the bottom to indicate that it's underpinning everything, or at the top because it should be the top priority. But I would want to highlight that one first. The real kind of message here is that without professional wisdom, without the space for teachers to be doing their own thing, doing things they're passionate about, none of this teaching for creativity is possible. And carving out the space for that is massively important in how we take this work forward in the partnership and how we disseminate it. So professional wisdom and professional teacher creativity is fundamental to the other pedagogies, I would say. We have ethics and trusteeship in there for the same reason it was mentioned in the skills. How do you encourage students to think about the impact of their creative ideas, what matters, what value systems they're working with? Encouraging problem solving, a really key part of creative skills that's in the skills list, but really pulling that out as a kind of key element that we want to encourage. This idea again that in the classroom, the atmosphere, the structure, the strategies need to be supporting individual, collaborative and communal activities for change, not an individualized model of creativity. Generating, exploring ideas, risking, being immersed in ideas, being playful, creating possibilities, and again, encouraging empowerment, autonomy and agency for the students. So for many teachers, these things I think are probably at the moment sort of latent or creeping in the capacity they have in their practice. And what we're really trying to do is to create a space that gives permission for these kind of practices to really push forward now in the partnership, and for teachers to be able to engage in their action research so that they can really understand what it is they're doing and be able to share that further beyond their own classrooms. So those are the pedagogies that we have created for the project. Thank you.
Okay, moment's hiatus there as I found the right button. Too wrapped on what that is talking about, and the opportunities that are afforded there for creative thinking, and that's, for me particularly, that sense of play within school, which I think is as we've already alluded to, often sorely missing at the moment. So the next part of our process is that we are going to pop you into one of 3 breakout rooms for about just under 15 minutes. The breakout rooms will be hosted by one of our 3 panelists, and this is really an opportunity for you all to have some focused conversation, really exploring what's resonated with you, what surprised you, or what's really hit your heart in terms of good news and positive thinking about practice in classrooms. Hello everybody, hopefully we're all reappearing in the right spaces. That worked very well. I felt very sorry for anybody who was talking in mid-sentence as they suddenly disappeared, but thank you for that. Certainly in the group I've just been in, really interesting conversation and points of challenge and points of reflection. So what we're going to do now, we've got a kind of plenary session, so a last session for 10 minutes where I'll ask Kerry, Sarah and Ursula to kind of feedback some of the key points that they're drawing on. This is a real opportunity. If you've got any burning questions at this moment, or observations that you want to make, please just drop them into the chat, and we'll just try and come to as many of those as we can. And just to say, we've got one in here from Simon James. Fantastic stuff, Kerry. Thank you. The 8-point creative pedagogy slide is terrific. Okay, thank you very much. So
thank you very much to Simon for that, because it did feel super important to have that matching the skills, so that door opens and the permission is there to be engaging in those pedagogies too. So yeah, definitely.
So lovely. So whoever, perhaps Ursula, do you want to kick off in terms of your group? Kerry, and then Sarah, if you want to kind of wrap up, that would be super. Thank you very much.
Okay, we had some great comments and questions. I'm going to just summarise very quickly. There was some comments about the value of having the kind of ethical, kind of meaningful dimension of creativity reflected strongly in the framework as being a really valuable thing, and how important that is in today's world. There was some comments around the pedagogy framework, which I thought were really interesting, which was about it being quite ideas-based, quite abstract at the moment, and an appetite to see some of the more kind of practical things coming through, which I think we're going to really start seeing as the action research progresses this year. thinking about creativity and well-being, which didn't come through so much in what we said today, but just saying that that's something that we have been thinking about in terms of what's said in the literature on that. And there was a question which just got cut in half, which was around leadership and creativity, which I think Sarah might have responded better to be honest. So maybe that's something that you could comment on when you wrap up in your section, Sarah.
Thank you, Ursula. Kerry.
Cool. Yeah, we had a similarly broad-ranging discussion. The idea of the skills framework sort of being a single unit that was portable. There was recognition that in lots of good practice where creativity is worked on in schools, there's often that sort of toolkit or wheel or whatever it is that brings together the skills, the practices within that setting, and how we can encourage other schools to go out and be doing their own versions of these is a really good way to be disseminating the work. We had a good conversation about the connection to the Careers Hub, particularly in Cornwall, how we could be connecting up to that, but also thinking about the connection to the careers agenda more widely. Really kind of reinforcing how important it was to have play in there and for that to be recognised and given permission for at the secondary level, and also discussions about creative confidence and how a lot of stuff about that kind of giving permission for things to happen, because as I said, I think a lot of it is lying latent and it's just ready to kind of come to the fore and emerge. So yeah, I think that was most of our discussion. So over to you, Sarah.
Lots of very similar things. I think there's quite a lot of interest around the Cornish context, which is great, and actually about houses developing that creative economy, but particularly, you know, down here in Cornwall, and whether, you know, this is helping develop that, you know, real life chances for our young people moving forward. And there's really interested about how we're connecting with not only just our industry partners, but our arts partners, and how that's blossoming. And I think, you know, that would be an interesting thing to share moving forward about how we're growing our networks and disseminating that moving forward. Obviously, you know, in terms of creative pathways, that, you know, through life, it's about how does that look as we journey from reception all the way through. And we talked a little bit about students' own understanding of their creativity, and, you know, how do we develop their awareness of it so it becomes part of their classroom curriculum and practice almost kind of innately, you know, without them, you know, being part necessarily needing to specify all the time what they're doing. I think it'd be useful now, Gary, if we, Ursula, do you mind just sharing the last slide? Actually give a bit of context about where we are this year, because I'm very conscious we've talked about year one, and if at any point there's anything you'd like to know more about, please don't hesitate. As we moved into year two, our aim was always about what do we do with all this stuff that we've gone and found out, and how do we now apply those creative skills? So we named year two Building and Testing, and very simply we are in the depths of some very exciting action research. We have colleagues from across all the schools, and including our ARB settings, immersed in action research, particularly for them looking at potential strands within those creative skills, and they have their own research question that will be across the curriculum. So for them it may be in their own classroom, which may be in English or maybe in science, but for a lot of them it's about considering that bigger impact for them moving forward. The idea is that these colleagues in action research now would also be our pathway into disseminating it across their schools and wider. For example, some of our schools are in multi-academy trusts as well. What's interesting and what we're starting to see is that it's just opening up this continual dialogue about what is creativity, what are these creative skills, how are they in our classrooms, and how do we foster them to move forward. The interesting twist, I guess, for us and how we're building our creativity network with our partners is we're linking each of our action research member of staff up with an industry or cultural partner. Some of those are very directly in the classroom working together. Some lovely examples of kind of building just not curriculum knowledge, but expertise around what that would look like in an industry or cultural setting, and really also asking our help of our cultural and industry partners to keep us on point with that bigger question about how are these skills needed in that modern workforce? What would it look like in dialogue and working collaboratively in a work setting? I think the other thing that came up from year one, which I've done a lot more on this year, is really utilising the expertise of our young people, really listening to what they feel works in their classroom, really embedding them in helping us develop this exciting future-proofed curriculum, asking our young people, does this work? How does this work? What would you like to see more of? How, if we do this, what is your reaction? So we're very much ingrained in that action research model of focus groups and listening to our young people's responses. Each time at the moment, we're linking that back to our creative skills. Kerry and Ursula have done an amazing job with helping us understand how to really measure the impact of our work. And we have a wonderful mentoring setup with both of them across our action research team. If there are any other questions about our year 2 plans, obviously please don't hesitate to pop them in the chat now, or perhaps drop us an email. We have a very long yet catchy email. Gary, I'm going to leave you to talk about moving forward and those last final bits.
Thanks, Sarah. There are just two kind of questions in the chat that would be worth picking up, because we've got a couple of minutes, particularly from Liz Hill, and what you talked about there about the employers and teachers coming together. So I don't know if you can see the chat there, Sarah, but Liz says, we're interested in your benchmarking of understanding of creativity and perception about where creativity sits, finding that the majority hold the idea that it sits in art subjects. Was this the case in the school and education settings, or also in the local industry partners? Was there a difference between how those two sectors are perceiving creativity and where it sits? So I don't know whether Sarah or either of the other of you, whether you've got something you want to share in that space.
Fantastic question. I have lots of answers. Kerry or Ursula, do you have a quick response to that one you'd like to share?
So I looked at that data across all of the different groups, and I think across all of the groups there was the perception that it was most strongly linked with the arts, but there was very, very clear articulation from the industry partners about how creativity was needed in their diverse sectors. So although the kind of immediate association amongst children and staff and young people, and that immediate association was with the arts, and that was the same across most of the groups, there was a very clear understanding actually that creativity was applied and was needed across a much wider sector.
And I think the interesting twist for us with our partners is they really wanted to engage with us in us really learning to understand. It's that adaptability, it's that responsiveness, it's about that, you know, that need in industry and in the workforce, as many of us would know, to really respond creatively in our thinking. And I think our industry partners, as Ursula said, were really passionate about that, which is true. Kerry, any bits to add there?
No, I think you've covered it beautifully, both of you.
And Sarah, there's just one other, which is basically somebody who's keen to get in contact. So Teresa from Canubian Arts and Science Trust would really like to connect and find how they can link up with the project. Final one from me to all three of you, just very quickly. What's been your best takeaway from this first year? What's the thing that's resonated and sticks with you?
Oh, that's a great question. Kerry?
I like the way you sidestep that straight away, Sarah. That's excellent.
For me, I think it's been this year watching the teachers get underway with their action research, the first few months being that kind of reticence, but really starting to see them since January take hold of the frameworks we've created last year with them, but really kind of start to own the framework, start to figure out what they want to focus in on in their research and start to engage in that in their classroom practice with the students. That's always the best bit for me, seeing the sort of research fever spread, I think. So that would be my highlight.
Thank you very much. Ursula.
Sorry, jumping in. I think for me, just thinking about year one in particular, I was lucky enough to do a number of the focus groups with students, and that was just a real highlight of the year last year, was talking to students and just hearing their enthusiasm, but also their insight into into creativity in general, but into how they were thinking about creativity in all sorts of different ways, and their kind of imagination about how they saw that in the future. So I think that was probably the highlight for me so far.
Thank you. Sarah?
I think, you know, for me, it's always an utter privilege to talk to teachers about teaching and children about learning. And we have utterly embraced that in what we've done last year and what we're doing this year and moving forward. And they're, you know, engaging in conversations about how we make our teaching and learning and our curriculums as exciting and ambitious as we can. It is just a real joy. So I think, you know, to then share that with partners and with the expertise around the research, there's just a host of very exciting conversations going on, and this is all about how we learn from each other and how we grow that learning community. And it is definitely growing, Gary, as you know.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Kerry. Just one final piece in the chat for people to note from Erin Welcome, just looking at the Welsh National Curriculum, the emphasis towards skills. So really an interesting point for maybe people to pick up and have a look on, a briefing from the Cultural Learning Alliance recently. So please do check that out. For now, we're about out of time, so I would like to thank Sarah and Ursula and Kerry for an absolutely fabulous contribution to this webinar that's really set the tone for what's happened and what's to come, and the sense of potential there, which is so exciting. Thank you to all of those of you who spent the afternoon with us for your interest and your questions and your reflections. Also, thanks to Holly, who is still pinging things into the chat for you, links and all sorts of other things, for keeping things spinning behind the scenes. Just a reminder that if you want to get in contact with the Penryn team, then that email is in the chat as well. And just from us at Real Ideas, if you want to keep up to date with what we're up to in terms of creative and cultural learning, please do sign up for our Educators newsletter. That's it from us. It's 16:59. Thank you very much. Have a good rest of the Wednesday. Thank you and goodbye.